Sorry, yes. And sat by me and said, "Are you preaching now?" And I thought, probably, yes, at some point, but yes. Here I am. So, good morning. Welcome. I was standing inside the church office door on Thursday morning, and outside, this guy turned up with a mobile phone in his hand. I'd never seen him before, but I noticed the anxious look on his eyes, dirty black streaks across his forehead, and very wet overalls. "I need to contact Dave Smith," he said. "I've been in the basement, and I got some bad news for you. The boiler has broken down. The one which heats the main church building, probably beyond repair. I'm going to have to condemn it." At first I thought, well, that's okay, it's only a boiler. We can replace it. But then I realized what it might mean for us on Sunday morning. And on Pledge Sunday, of all days. And then the lights went on. I hope they'll stay on. You never quite know in this place, but I hope they'll stay on. What perfect timing to demonstrate once again that these buildings of ours are on their last legs. If the devil was trying to prevent people showing up this morning to give money and pledges by turning down the heat, then what the Lord was doing was turning up the message volume. Something has to be done here. These amazing but ancient premises, which have served us so well for 137 years, have become, as they say, uneconomic to repair. And if the stones could speak, they would have such stories to tell us of leaky roofs and missing tiles, of damp rooms, and maybe some dry rot here and there. Ask Fox the chronicler. That's Malcolm Fox, our resident archivist and gatherer of tales. He told me of the occasion during the Second World War. I don't think he was around then, but apparently one Sunday a flying bomb or some such device flew through the barrel roof here and remarkably kept going out of that window, so keep your heads down, and landed in the car park opposite, where it exploded, apparently. The congregation was shaken but not stirred, and the service continued as the fire engine screamed up Lansdowne Road. So you see, if you are sitting there this morning just a little bit cold, be thankful. It could be a lot worse. But more seriously, let me invite you on what may perhaps prove to be a defining day in the history of LBC. Let me invite you not to smell the past, but to smell the future. Because that's what this is about. It's about smelling what God is going to do in the future. And that is vision. Vision is the capacity to see and smell the future. And building with vision is the first of our messages from the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. These are his memoirs, recorded in his journal as he became the clerk of works for the city of Jerusalem in about 445 BC. So, with the news of that broken down boiler in my mind on Thursday morning, I went back to my study and opened Nehemiah chapter 1 and began to read the words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, "Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire." You see, from city walls and gates in the 5th century BC to church boilers in the 21st century, things break down. But for Nehemiah, the news he heard produced this reaction in him. Look at verse 4 in our text. "When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted. And as I read Nehemiah's reaction, I could see in my mind a sermon taking shape for this morning. I understood the connection between an ancient Jewish building project and what we are about to embark upon today and in the coming months. I want to say this at the outset from this passage. Number one, vision is born in brokenness. Nehemiah broke as he began to appreciate what was going on far, far away in his homeland. And he had a vision, he could smell the future. But that vision was born initially in brokenness. Now, not always, not all vision is born in brokenness. Vision can be birthed in delight and joy, can't it? 2 weeks ago, I saw images of my first grandchild taken during the 21-week scan. Beautiful images. That vision of the sacredness of human life was captured in awesome digital detail. The head, which already looks so much like the shape of the Father's, the tiny fingers, the spine. You see, there was the future, and I could see it. If I were to ask you to describe how you would want to picture your life in 10 years' time, chances are you could do that. You could outline a financial profile. You could describe what you hope to achieve relationally. You have some idea of where you want to be professionally. You would be able to look beyond what is and paint a picture of what could be, what should be true of your life. That's vision. The fact is, my friend, everybody ends up somewhere in life. And a few people end up somewhere on purpose. And they are the ones with vision. They may have other things going for them as well, but they certainly have vision. Odds are, without a clear vision, you will come to the end of your life and you will wonder. You will wonder what you could have done. You will wonder what you should have done. Vision, you see, gives significance to the otherwise meaningless details of our lives. And let's face it, much of what we do doesn't appear to matter much, does it? But you take the mundane details of this coming week and you put them into the crucible of God-shaped, God-directed vision, and suddenly there is purpose. Think of it this way. It's the difference between filling bags with dirt and building a wall to save a city. There's nothing glamorous about filling bags with dirt. But saving a city, which is what Nehemiah could see as his life's purpose, that is. Building a wall gives meaning to the chore of filling bags with dirt. And so it is with vision. Sometimes, as I say, vision is born in joy. But more often than not, visions are born in brokenness, in the realization that things are not right and need to change. That's certainly how it was for Nehemiah here. The news of Judah's disgrace, its ruined defenses, its tattered reputation broke this man, and ultimately filled him with a determination to make a difference, to see things change. Now, for the broken walls of Nehemiah's Jerusalem, read the broken walls of the church here in the UK. Do I need to remind you of how broken we are in the church today? The fact that every month, for the last 15 years, somewhere in the nations of the UK, a church has opened its doors for the last time, and somebody has switched off the lights. Every month, for the last 15, 20 years. Take my own homeland. They have been turning chapels in the former mining valleys of Wales into warehouses and nightclubs. You can walk down in the Rhondda Valley, a single main street today that was once full of thousands of worshippers and scores of churches, and see Carmel and Zoa and Beulah and Zion boarded up abandoned, and overgrown. Nationally, through the UK, we are losing 1,000 people a week from our congregations. Get a hold of this, folks. This is what's going on. The generation between the ages of 13 to 30 is virtually non-existent in many churches. And today, where are the sacred spaces? What are the temples of hope today in the UK? They are our multinational headquarters, our sports arenas, our concert venues, our retail centres, or as in the Lansdowne area here, towering office blocks and student accommodation. You know as well as I do, time was when the cityscapes and skylines of our towns and villages were dominated by spires and crosses. But not now, not anymore. The church, which used to be at the heart of the community, erecting its glorious buildings in the name of God and for the benefit of others, is marginalized and broken down. The Christian voice, which used to be clear and important, is now largely muted and irrelevant. And the question I ask from this passage is, what does all of that I've just described do for us? Does it matter to us? Do we care about the spiritual decline in our society? Does it matter to you that your children are growing up in a society where the laws are going to make it increasingly difficult for them to live and speak as Christians in school and work? Does it affect us that we live in broken Britain, where the meaning of marriage is being redefined, where the inequality gap and the poverty trap appears to get wider and bigger? Do we care? Do we care about the Bible illiteracy in our schools? You see, are we like Nehemiah, broken by these things? Vision is born in such brokenness, in seeing things as they are, and then as they might be. Why spend £3 million on a church centre? Because, quite frankly, the nation needs us to. If churches like ours don't step up and work to change the spiritual temperature and address the huge needs of our communities, then who's going to? We can't expect smaller churches to do that. Those corner shops still have a great purpose. But what is needed strategically is larger churches like this one, with a growth and business plan to train and equip young people and students for Christian discipleship in the real world. You see, among the thousands of young students who walk past our doors every day, there are those who will end up in national life in significant positions, influencing the values of the media and education, industry and science, the next generation of leaders. And it's not just under 25s who need LBC to go for this project. Where are Christian marriages going to be built or restored? Where are the lost going to find direction and the hopeless hope? Where are the elderly going to find true community? In places like this, in church families like ours. Why spend £3 million on this redevelopment? Not just because the nation needs us to, but because the world needs us to. LBC's impact has always been global. From the times when Francis Dixon's Bible notes were sent out right across the world to the present-day international influence of mission partners like Gordon and Jane Scholl-Rogers, whom we heard from earlier. They are among the most influential voices in the World Evangelical Alliance. Where is the next generation of mission partners going to come from? Somewhere among these pews, or in the youth church meeting now in the Sunday school classes. Somewhere amongst all of that are the future Christian teachers and engineers and environmentalists who will work in the 1040 window. And then there's the way in which Bournemouth and the conurbation is one of the leading UK centres for educating internationals. God has so organized it that we have only to walk less than 100 yards and we will be in touching distance of someone from China or South Korea or Latin America or Eastern Europe. Sometimes when I think about the potential of this place and the scope of its reach, the decision to stay in the Lansdowne area is absolutely the right one. And the plans to develop the ministry here are utterly compelling. But that sort of vision begins in brokenness, in pain, in seeing just what a mess the nation is in, and accepting responsibility as a church to do something about it. It is the same, more personally perhaps, with the broken walls of our lives. The vision of a single mum to give a better future to her children is born in the pain of her loneliness and isolation. The vision of a stronger marriage for a couple whose love has grown cold is born in the pain of disappointment and maybe even the brokenness of their vows. For Nehemiah, his vision began in a very unlikely way. Like large doors, big life-changing events often swing on small hinges. And the small hinge for him was just another day in the summer palace in southern Iran of the Persian king Artaxerxes, until some fellow Jews turned up with the latest news from Jerusalem. Nehemiah belonged, as you may know, to a generation whose great-great-grandparents had been rounded up in cattle trucks and taken to the death camps of Babylon. As part of that massive deportation ordered by Nebuchadnezzar, the temple in Jerusalem had been destroyed, the city walls were razed to the ground, and the king captured. No land now for Israel, no worship, no monarchy, nothing left. All hope had gone. And although that had happened 150 years before the narrative of Nehemiah, it seems from his reactions that it felt for him like yesterday. And in the intervening time between that first impact in Jerusalem to the present under Nehemiah, there had been various attempts to reconstruct life in Jerusalem. Cyrus, the Persian king, in 536 BC, allowed 50,000 Jews to return and restore the temple. But disputes and other problems among the community meant that it took a further 20 years before the temple was completed. And then another 60 miserable years went by, during which only the intervention of that Jewish queen, Esther, saved them all from genocide. Next came Ezra the priest. He was a contemporary of Nehemiah. His story is right next door in our Bibles. He restores the law of God and reforms the worship of the temple, and things begin to pick up until, without royal permission, some of the Jews attempt to rebuild those city walls. And Nehemiah's boss, Artaxerxes, is furious. Everything stops. The city is attacked again. The walls are set alight. The people live in fear. And that is probably the terrible news which Nehemiah hears. Nehemiah hears in verse 3. And his response turns just another day into what will become 4 months of heartbreak. I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted. You see, the man who was called to rebuild the walls first has to weep over the ruins. That is an absolute principle in the spiritual world. You see it operating time and time again with God. The people God uses most are the people who care most, who weep over the ruins, who care about the way things are in the world around them, in the church, in the community, and in their lives. They truly engage with what they see, and they ache with a sense of anguish. You see, for such people, this is not just a news headline. Walls broken down. They feel it. It matters to them when others are struggling. It matters to them that their friends don't love Jesus. that governments pass legislation which undermine Christian values. It matters. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn." They are the happy ones, you see. Vision is born in brokenness. Blessed are those who've looked at the broken walls of their own relationship to God, who mourn the inconsistency of their character, who front up to their failure, who long to see the hungry fed and the weak protected, and those without the truth of Jesus discovering it. And my dear friends, if we do not have the capacity to be touched by the painful truth we see all around us in our society, the walls that are in ruins, the lives that need repair, our own lives, then we need, in a sense, to fall on our knees and ask the God of heaven to give us a heart that feels, to break us. We need to pray that God's Spirit may melt our indifference so that we can look at the world through the eyes of Christ and feel his compassion for the world. That takes us to the second feature of vision. If vision is born often in brokenness, it is clarified through prayer. Did you see the first thing that Nehemiah did when he heard the news? He prayed. "I heard these things. I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." The beginning of any spiritual rebuilding process starts there, in prayer. For prayer is the door that opens our helplessness to God. There are 9 of Nehemiah's prayers recorded in his memoirs. Most of them are very brief. This one from verse 5 begins with the recognition of who God is, the God of heaven, the great and awesome God. You see what that does for Nehemiah? As he contemplates the ruin of the nation and the broken down walls, as he sees the size of the project ahead of him, do you see what the recognition of God's greatness does for him? It shows him that there is a higher throne than that of Artaxerxes. There's a world ruled by a king greater than all the kings of the earth. A king who's entered into commitments with the people he loves. Nehemiah recognizes that there's more beyond the human throne he served. There is more beyond the ruined walls of Jerusalem. The God of heaven reigns over his life, a God who is in relationship covenantally to a people to whom he has made unbreakable promises. That is where all true prayer must start, with a vision of God's glory and greatness. It doesn't start with us and our needs and this £3 million and the building project. It starts with a recognition of the greatness of God. That's where Jesus starts in the famous prayer he taught us to pray. "Our Father in heaven, holy is your name." You see, when we are faced with the pressures of life, when we survey the wreckage of a broken relationship, when our dreams turn into nightmares, we've got to know that there is more than this. And that more is the God from whose gracious presence we can never be separated. The God whose arms are everlasting. The God who hears and answers prayer. Because from such recognition, Nehemiah moves in verse 6 to confession. He says in verse 6, "I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you." He confesses other people's sins as if they are his own. He accepts his part and the part of his family in the 100 and more years of spiritual failure and disobedience. This is not just their problem in Judah, it is his. He understands himself, you see, to be part of a bigger community and a greater story. Now, that is not the way we think and feel today. Our culture stresses individualism. We are taught almost from day one to worship the idol of the self, to protect the rights of a private life. We don't see society's failings as our own, nor do we believe the solutions to be our responsibility. We don't feel ownership of Africa's poverty or the neighbor's difficulties, Britain's greed and secularism. And that, it seems to me, is what is going on in Nehemiah's heart, and what needs to go on in the church today and in the heart of every Christian. We do not distance ourselves from the society in which we live. We do as Nehemiah does here. We identify with that community in all its weakness and failure and sin, and we confess that to God, that we are part of the problem. Quickly, one final element in building vision. I can only leave it with you, and we'll pick it up again next Sunday morning. Vision is born in pain, it's clarified through prayer, and finally, it is executed by a plan. This idea of the plan stretches across our chapter into chapter 2, but the hint is there in verse 11. At the end of his prayer, Nehemiah says this: "Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. I was cupbearer to the king." Prayer needs to be specific, definite, and bold. So often we can pray around the houses in vague generalities and never get to the point. Nehemiah wasn't only a man who prayed, he was also a man who planned. And if some of us come unstuck because we fail to pray, others can come unstuck because we fail to plan. And there is nothing unspiritual about making plans. And that was Nehemiah's approach. Give your servant success today before this man, the king. You see, the king is the human key to the whole project, the favor of Artaxerxes. He was no ordinary man. He could be the key person in delivering this remarkable rebuilding project if he could be persuaded to help. Everything else would follow. Now, Nehemiah had worked that out in prayer. Praying had given him uncomfortable clarity. Uncomfortable because he saw that this would involve putting his own life on the line, risking his job as cupbearer to the king for the sake of his people. Sometimes the last thing we want to be told is that we are the answer to our own prayers. That what God wants us to do is change in some way, stepping out of our comfort zones, taking responsibility. But with this I close. That is the price of a vision born in brokenness, clarified through prayer, and executed by a plan. You need to come back next week to see if Nehemiah's plan works. But right now, we need to sing. We need to sing a song about commitment to the God who keeps his promises. It's the song, "By Faith We See the Hand of God." And it tells us that we stand as a church in a long line of Christian believers and men and women of faith who look forward to what God is going to do, whose vision has been born in brokenness, clarified through prayer, and will be executed by God's gracious plan for our lives. Let's stand and sing. By faith, we see the hand of God.